Much of what we have to do anyways is working off the same checklists as a big pharma company. It's just that we have somewhat smaller teams. So one key factor is that we have to upgrade the supply chain connections up and downstream. Importantly, of course, we need to link with our contract manufacturers, make sure that they're enabled and that we have the right data exchanges. And here, of course, we have to think very hard about do we want to build point-to-point connections with all contract manufacturers with an own system in-house, or do we want to connect to a network with pre-existing connections? And I think for a smaller company, in my view, it's very clear that the only practical thing is to link to a pre-existing network. But also for big pharma, I think this is for efficiency reasons, this should be a serious consideration instead of building countless point-to-point connections. Then we have to think about logistics service providers. Depending on the strategy, we might have to link up with them as well. What I think is a difference between big pharma and smaller pharma is the leverage that we have. Being a small customer for many of our contract manufacturers, we simply cannot enforce very special requirements. So we have tried in what we do to be quite mainstream, but that's difficult, and I'll come to that because it's not always clear what is really what are the more normal and typical requirements. Now, we also have, regardless of the company size, we have to define a strategy and look at the internal processes. So that really doesn't depend on the company size. Select an enterprise serialization system, selecting line systems, then of course upgrading your own manufacturing lines, that depends on how many you have. So big pharma has more to do, but the fundamentals of selecting the systems we have to do also in a smaller company. And we have to make decisions on strategy. For example, do we want to aggregate? More on that later. We also have to keep up to date with the authorities' requirements. And I'm saying today's authorities' requirements with purpose, but because they are changing. We have seen quite some evolution. Some authorities have really steadily and over a reasonable time frame developed requirements and stick to them. Others have been a bit more creative, unfortunately. It's very important for every company to be up to date on what is happening in the world. And I think they're also working with some capable partners helps, and visiting events like this one to make sure that we understand where the whole thing is going, and also what our peers think about some specific countries' requirements, some of which are simply not implementable, and we have seen some countries already having to retract their initial requirements because of that. And one task which I think has also been underestimated, but this is also really independent of the company size, you need to define internal processes and SOPs. How do we create and allocate serial numbers? How do we do QA release of serialized products? How do we decommission serial numbers? And by the way, all of that has to be done in a very secure way, because obviously, since we're talking about anti-counterfeiting here, anybody who would like to counterfeit your product would be very interested in getting to know your valid serial numbers.